Do you know your Noah? The story of Noah's Ark is often dismissed by critics for its absurd claim that God brought two of every animal species to magically fit on a wooden boat. Yet there are more problems involved in this tale than that. At almost every part of the story, we can find either scientific impossibilities or contradictions. Let's start first with the ark itself. In Genesis 6:14-15, Noah is told by God to build an ark out of cypress wood, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. According to answers in Genesis and other sources of biblical literalism, Noah's flood occurred roughly around 2304 BC, putting the construction of the ark smack in the middle of the Bronze Age. As of yet, no seafaring vessel of such immense proportions has been found that does not have an iron hull construction, and this poses an obvious problem for a craft built in the Bronze Age, before iron was discovered. Some apologists like to point to the Egyptian queen Hatshepsut's barge as an example of a large vessel with a wooden hull, but the barge has only been estimated to be 200 feet long by 70 feet wide, which is not nearly as long as Noah's Ark, and this craft was simply used to transport obelisks downriver, not survive turbulent oceans. Interestingly, though, there may be more of a connection here than meets the eye. I always found it odd that Noah's boat was called an ark, when the Ark of the Covenant meant something distinctly different. The latter is a chest or box that stored relics, while the former is supposed to be a floating vessel of some sort. However, the words in their original Hebrew are not the same. The Ark of Noah is not the same as the Ark of the Covenant. What does the Hebrew word for Noah's Ark mean? Well, it doesn't mean ship, because there is another Hebrew word for that in the Bible, but it does apparently mean basket. In Exodus 2:3, when Moses is put into a wicker basket, the word used is the same word used for Noah's Ark in Genesis. But the oddities don't end there. The word used for basket in the Moses story is not used for basket anywhere else. So what exactly is this thing that we've been calling an ark all this time? The word ark comes into usage with the Septuagint, or Greek translation of the Old Testament. In it, kibotos is used for both Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant. The translators of the Septuagint were allegedly 70 Hebrew scribes, so this begs the question, if tava really means boat or ship, why did these native Hebrew speakers translate it to box or chest, to the same word for the Ark of the Covenant? This word is still used for box today, as tavat doar is Hebrew for post office box in one example. Additionally, linguistic scholars believe the word may have been borrowed from an Egyptian word, which meant box or coffin. With all of this in mind, it is not so surprising that the Septuagint translators rendered the word in the same way as the box-shaped Ark of the Covenant. Perhaps the only difference between the Hebrew words for Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant is that one has an Egyptian origin and the other is Hebrew. This could also explain the use of tavat for Moses' basket, with the story's close association to Egypt, i.e. papyrus, the Nile, and so on. There are also interpretations and artistic depictions of baby Moses being sent downriver in a box or chest, as opposed to a basket. Even the Jewish historian Josephus calls Moses' basket a cradle, or koitidi in Greek, which is closely related to kibotos, or ark, in English. So it seems that Noah's Ark was probably more of a long rectangular box than the curvy ship we see in most modern depictions. And why should this be surprising, given that other ancient Mesopotamian flood myths described similar floating boxes, like the Epic of Gilgamesh? Sumerian tablets tell the story of a king named Ziusudra, who constructed a large boat to save himself, his family, and at least a few animals from a local flood. What's more is that archaeological evidence has turned up for a flood in the Shurapak region noted in the story, and sediments have been dated to approximately 2900 BC. A king using his personal barge to spare himself and some others from a regional flood is quite a bit less absurd than a massive wooden rectangular box surviving a worldwide flood for nearly a full year. But wait a minute, Noah, we're not done with you yet. Have any of you guys and gals ever seen a tree? Have you ever seen one grow and produce leaves 7 days after a flood? In Genesis 8:8-11, Noah sends out a dove that returns to the ark because the earth is still covered in water. After another 7 days, the dove is let loose again, and it brings a fresh olive leaf back to Noah. If everything had been destroyed in the flood, which plant life certainly would be when covered under water for so long, even a surviving seed could not grow into an olive tree and produce leaves over a 7-day period. Speaking of the destruction caused by the flood, did any people besides Noah's family survive? According to Genesis 7:23, only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. Before the flood in Genesis 6:4, the Bible notes that there were giants in the land, known as the Nephilim. Long after the flood in Numbers 13:33, we read again of these Nephilim. Was someone in Noah's family carrying the giant gene? Was a giant secretly a baby daddy to one of Noah's daughter-in-laws? We all know the traditional story that God called 2 of every animal to the ark, and this is found in Genesis 6:19 and 7:8-9. However, in Genesis 7:2, we find God instructing Noah to bring 7 of every kind of clean animal, plus 2 of the unclean. Some apologists like to argue that there is no issue here, that it was merely 2 of every unclean animal and 7 of every clean kind. Yet this division of clean and unclean is contradicted by Genesis 7:8-9. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, it states, they went into the ark to Noah by 2s. Every translation except the NIV specifies 2s in this passage. Gotta clean up the Word of God to make it less confusing, I suppose. Last of all, when did Noah and his family enter the ark? Genesis 7:7-10 says, "And Noah and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. After the 7 days the flood waters came on the earth." So 7 days before the flood, Noah and company got on the ark. Or on the same day the flood started. Genesis 7:11-13 reads, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark." For the biblical literalist, reconciling the story of Noah's Ark with science and even its own contradictory portions can cause quite a headache. And perhaps that's because it's much more fiction and theology than fact.
Inni nimi vieta ma kull ma